Welcome to Dusky Lore. Close your eyes, dim the lights, and listen closely as the shadows begin to speak. Story 1. The luxury cruise ship Northern Dreams was supposed to be the perfect honeymoon for Michael and Ashley Thompson, a couple from Dallas. However, a shore excursion in a remote Alaskan village would end up shattering their new marriage in the most inexplicable way. The couple had saved for 3 years to afford the premium glacier route package, which included a private balcony cabin and exclusive access to some of the most pristine locations in Alaska's Inside Passage. Michael was 28 years old, and Ashley was 26. They had been together since high school, and after a decade as a couple, they had finally made it to the altar. Michael worked as a software engineer for a medical device company. He was methodical, cautious, and careful by nature. Ashley, on the other hand, taught 3rd grade and had an adventurous spirit that constantly pushed the relationship toward new experiences. Their friends described them as a perfectly complementary couple, Michael's cautious planning balanced by Ashley's spontaneous enthusiasm. Their wedding photographs showed 2 people radiating happiness and anticipation for the future that lay ahead of them. The Northern Dreams departed from Seattle on August 14, 2024, with 450 passengers on board, on what was advertised as the ultimate 8-day Alaskan experience. The ship's itinerary included stops in Ketchikan, Juneau, and Skagway, with a final day dedicated to visiting the remote village of Hoonah on Chichagof Island. Michael and Ashley spent the first few days exactly as they had planned, photographing glaciers from their balcony, attending the ship's nightly shows, and taking part in guided excursions that kept them safely within the designated tourist areas. Other passengers remembered the Thompsons as an affectionate couple who seemed genuinely excited about every aspect of their Alaskan experience. Ashley bought postcards at every port and wrote detailed messages to their friends back home, while Michael maintained a travel blog with daily updates and carefully framed photographs. They appeared to be living the honeymoon of their dreams, until they arrived in Hoonah on August 20th. Hoonah is home to approximately 750 residents, most of them members of the Hoonah Tlingit tribe, whose families have inhabited the area for thousands of years. The village sits on the shores of Icy Strait, surrounded by dense temperate rainforest, and is accessible only by boat or small aircraft. Most cruise ships dock at a modern tourist facility built specifically for visitors, but the Northern Dreams was small enough to anchor directly in the harbor, allowing passengers to be transported by launches to the village dock. The scheduled shore excursion consisted of a 4-hour cultural tour that included traditional dance demonstrations, exhibits of local art, and a guided walk through the historic center of the town. Michael and Ashley joined the main group at first, posing for photographs beside traditional totem poles and buying handmade jewelry from local artists. But according to other passengers, around 2 p.m., Ashley became fixated on a specific section of forest visible from the center of the village. Margaret Stevens, a retired nurse from Portland who had become friends with the couple during the cruise, later told investigators that Ashley kept pointing toward the tree line and asking the Tlingit guide about the singing. When the guide asked what she meant, Ashley said she could hear voices calling her name from somewhere in the forest. The guide, an elder named Robert Jack, who had lived in Hoonah his entire life, immediately became serious and suggested that Ashley ignore anything she thought she was hearing. But Ashley's behavior began to grow increasingly unsettled. She told Michael that she needed to find out where the voices were coming from, insisting that they sounded familiar, like relatives asking for help. Michael tried to convince her to stay with the group, reminding her that they had to return to the ship before 5 p.m., and that entering an unfamiliar wilderness area was dangerous. Ashley had never shown any tendency to behave irrationally during their relationship, which made her sudden fixation even more alarming. At approximately 2:30 p.m., despite Michael's protests and the guide's warnings, Ashley separated from the tour group and walked toward the edge of the forest. Michael followed her immediately, calling her name and trying to catch up to her. Margaret Stevens was the last person from the cruise to see them together. She watched them disappear among the dense spruce and hemlock trees surrounding the village. She described Ashley as moving with unusual determination, as if she knew exactly where she was going, despite never having visited the area before. When the couple had not returned by 4 p.m., the cruise director contacted village authorities and organized a search party. Robert Jack, despite his advanced age, immediately volunteered to help, accompanied by 2 younger men who knew the forest trails. The Hoona Volunteer Fire Department activated its emergency protocol, and within less than an hour, 25 searchers were combing the forest in a systematic grid pattern. The terrain around Hoona is difficult. Steep ravines carved by ancient glacial activity, dense vegetation capable of hiding a person only a few feet away, and numerous small streams that form natural barriers. Rescuers expected to find the couple within hours, assuming they had simply gotten lost or injured on unfamiliar trails. But as daylight began to fade, the search took on an increasingly desperate tone. At 8:47 p.m., just as the organized group was preparing to continue with flashlights and headlamps, Ashley Thompson emerged from the forest alone. She was found by 2 village residents approximately half a mile from the point where she and Michael had entered the trees, walking calmly along a logging road that led back toward the harbor. Her appearance shocked everyone who saw her. Ashley's clothes were completely dry despite the thick mist that had lingered throughout the afternoon, and she showed no signs of exhaustion or distress after spending 6 hours in a dense wilderness area. Even more disturbing was her behavior. When the searchers approached her, Ashley looked at them in total confusion and asked where she was. She did not recognize the village of Hoona, even though she had spent the entire afternoon there. When they asked her about Michael, she stared at them blankly and asked who they were talking about. Ashley did not remember being married, had no memory of the cruise or her honeymoon, and did not appear to know that she was in Alaska. The ship's medical staff examined Ashley immediately and found no signs of head trauma, drug use, or any physical condition that could explain her memory loss. Her vital signs were normal, and she showed no symptoms of hypothermia, despite having spent hours in the cold, damp forest. Psychologically, she was calm and cooperative, but she insisted that her name was Ashley Morrison, her maiden name, and that she lived in Dallas with her parents. She claimed to be 22 years old and to work as a substitute teacher while finishing her degree in education. The most inexplicable aspect of Ashley's condition was her specific knowledge of places she should not have been able to find. When asked how she had navigated the forest, she led searchers to 3 separate locations where she said she had rested. Each of those places held significance in local Tlingit history: a traditional fishing camp, a cemetery abandoned more than a century earlier, and a ceremonial site that even many village residents did not know about. Ashley described those sites in detail, using terminology that suggested a deep familiarity with indigenous culture and traditions she had never studied. Meanwhile, the search for Michael intensified. Dogs were brought in from Juneau, and helicopter patrols began at dawn. The search area expanded to cover more than 50 square miles of wilderness, including remote valleys that had not received human visitors in years. Despite the enormous effort, no trace of Michael Thompson was ever found. No clothing, no equipment, no footprints beyond the initial marks proving that he had followed Ashley into the forest. The Alaska State Troopers treated the case as a possible homicide and questioned Ashley extensively, despite her apparent memory loss. Polygraph tests were inconclusive because of her psychological state, and medical experts were divided over whether her amnesia was real or fabricated. Ashley consistently maintained that she did not remember Michael, her marriage, or the events that had brought her to Alaska. She passed every medical and psychological evaluation without showing signs of deception or mental illness. The investigation revealed troubling details about the area of forest where the couple had vanished. When authorities pressed local Tlingit elders, they reluctantly shared traditional warnings about certain places in the forest. They spoke of areas where the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of dead spirits grew thin. Places where people could become lost not only physically, but also temporally. Robert Jack, the tour guide, eventually admitted that he had hesitated to search certain areas because of stories he had heard since childhood about people entering the forest and emerging transformed, sometimes decades later, sometimes as completely different individuals. Ashley was eventually sent back to Dallas, where her family struggled to help her rebuild a life she did not remember having lived. Medical specialists from across the country examined her case, but none could explain her selective amnesia or her inexplicable knowledge of Alaska Native culture. She underwent hypnotherapy, cognitive rehabilitation, and experimental treatments designed to recover lost memories, but nothing managed to restore her memory of her life with Michael or of her honeymoon. 6 months after the disappearance, Ashley began having vivid dreams about walking through an endless forest where voices called her name from every direction. In those dreams, she followed the voices deeper and deeper into the wilderness until she reached a clearing where figures dressed in traditional Tlingit clothing were waiting for her. The dreams always ended the same way. Ashley had to choose between following the figures into the forest or returning toward a distant light that she somehow knew represented her old life. Michael's family hired private investigators who spent more than a year following leads and interviewing witnesses, but the case remained unsolved. His body was never recovered, despite numerous additional searches, and no evidence was found to suggest that he had been the victim of an animal attack or a natural disaster. The insurance companies eventually declared him dead, but his family refused to accept that conclusion. The Northern Dream suspended its excursions to Hoona after the incident, and cruise lines began requiring guided supervision for all forest activities in remote Alaskan villages. The case became a cautionary story used in maritime safety training, although instructors struggled to explain what precautions could have prevented the tragedy. Today, Ashley lives in Dallas under her maiden name and works as an elementary school teacher, with no memory of her former life. She never remarried, stating that she feels incomplete in a way she cannot explain. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she feels drawn to documentaries about Alaska and indigenous cultures, watching them with an intensity that even she does not understand. Her friends describe her as a deeply changed person, still kind and intelligent, but carrying an indefinable sadness that seems to come from somewhere beyond conscious memory. The case of Michael and Ashley Thompson remains active in the files of the Alaska State Troopers, although no new leads have emerged in recent years. Their story serves as a stark reminder that the Alaskan wilderness holds mysteries that go beyond the merely physical. Places where the very nature of identity and memory can be challenged in ways that science still cannot explain. In a land where indigenous peoples have always understood that the forest contains powers beyond human understanding, the disappearance of one person and the transformation of another remain as testimony to forces as vast and unknowable as the Alaskan wilderness itself. Story 2. The last known photograph of Marcus Davidson was taken at 8:12 in the morning on a cold July day inside Denali National Park. The jagged silhouette of Mount Foraker rose in shadow behind his tent, while his face showed absolute confidence and sun-marked determination. He was 34 years old, an experienced backpacker and ultramarathon runner from Phoenix, Arizona. Marcus was the kind of man who quoted Emerson in his Instagram bio and listed his highest altitude reach next to his job title at a solar energy company. His friends described him as disciplined and ambitious, though also stubborn. From the moment he first set foot in Alaska, it is said that he promised his followers he would complete a true solo journey through the wild interior of Denali. No guides, only compass navigation, dehydrated meals prepared by himself, a satellite beacon reserved strictly for emergencies, and a mounted camera to document every crucial step of the route. For Marcus, that trip was not simply an adventure. It was a personal statement. To conquer your fears, you must enter them alone. He arrived in Anchorage on July 2nd, cheerful and talkative, though more sleep-deprived than he wanted to admit. His mother, Susan, called him twice during that first weekend. He replied with preset messages from the shuttle van. "Don't worry, Mom. Alaska is even more beautiful than they say. I could stay here forever." The last person to see him in the city was a grocery store cashier who remembered the sunburned hiker with an overloaded backpack and camera gear, buying 3 bottles of water, a package of jerky, and a pencil for his field notes. His plan, according to the itinerary he left with his friend Alan Jenkins, consisted of a 6-day hike from the Wonder Lake trailhead heading north, forming a loop toward a poorly marked glacial valley rarely visited except by the most experienced. The only way to feel alive, Marcus had said, is to go places no one else dares to enter. The first day passed without incident. Photographs and footprints along the Wonder Lake Trail. Everything was verified by 2 vacationing families from Seattle at mile 12. They saw Marcus resting beside a waterfall, helping a pair of children identify cloudberry plants. That same afternoon, he signed the remote area register at Sable Pass. All clear, no bears, weather holding, spirits even higher. His handwriting, always precise, hinted at enthusiasm. Later, park rangers noted the time of the entry, 2:36 p.m. They also pointed out that his was the only solo name registered that day. On the third morning, Marcus's route departed from the park's recommended map. According to geolocated photographs, he continued beyond Coyote Creek, veering east instead of following the river north. He was still posting short clips from his phone whenever the battery allowed, describing socks soaked by rain and the humbling silence of the tundra. The angle of the sun in later images suggests that he reached the entrance to the glacial valley shortly after midnight. At that latitude, the sky never becomes completely dark during July. In the background of his final video, the landscape appears bathed in gold and silver tones, but a blurry distortion slides along the left edge of the frame, a washed-out stain that Marcus never mentions. When he failed to make the 5th-day satellite check-in, as he had agreed with Alan, his disappearance triggered the first wave of concern. At first, no one panicked. Marcus was known for extending his plans. But another 24 hours passed and there was only silence. On July 9th, Denali Park Rangers began the search. The weather had started to worsen. It was the kind of cold wind that one searcher described as a warning sent directly from the Arctic. Rangers and volunteers covered the marked trails and then moved deeper into the valley where Marcus's GPS had emitted its last signal. They found his camp 3 days later, at the edge of a gravel plain washed by water, miles from the nearest human traffic. The camp was intact. His tent was perfectly pitched. The gas canister was half used. The maps remained pinned down by a single stone on one corner of the sleeping pad. The compass, the stove, the spare socks, and his prized field journal were still there. Only Marcus's boots were missing. There were no obvious signs of a struggle. One ranger found his phone in airplane mode, stored inside a sealed plastic bag, following local water protection guidelines. However, what chilled every searcher was the absence of footprints. In the uneven silt around the tent, Marcus's tracks were clearly visible. They went from the tent to the nearby creek and back again to the tent. But there were no additional tracks leading away into the surrounding brush or climbing toward the glacier. There was no indication that he had left under pressure, nor any signs that a bear or another animal had dragged him away. The area had experienced a sharp drop in temperature, but not a significant snowfall, and the silt should have recorded recent movement. His boots were never found. The wildlife cameras in the area, reviewed after his disappearance, showed nothing except herds of caribou and one night, the distant shine of some animal's eyes. But in one of the final time-stamped photographs Marcus sent to his cloud account, taken sometime after midnight, observers noticed a strange vertical blur in the background, a translucent gray figure against the rocks, almost as if something had moved quickly through the frame just as the shutter activated. The angle made the object difficult to identify. Was it a bear standing upright? A tree moved by the wind? Digital analysts could not agree. The most baffling detail appeared later, when Alan Jenkins gained access to Marcus's GPS watch data. The last coordinates recorded during the early morning hours showed a sudden and impossible burst of movement toward the east, more than a mile in less than 3 minutes. It was terrain that would have required ropes and technical climbing even for the most prepared expert. The line zigzagged and then cut off in a flat stroke when the device powered down. Electrical failure? An error caused by solar interference? The manufacturer could not reproduce the malfunction during testing, and no other device in Denali recorded similar anomalies that week. The Rangers cataloged the evidence, classified Marcus as missing, and distributed statewide alerts asking people to remain watchful. Although the initial search covered more than 50 square miles, no additional clues were found. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the valley, and dog teams tracked the nearby forests. But the search team never found dropped clothing, bright rescue tape, or used flares. The consensus around the campfires at the search base was grim. People disappear in Alaska every year, but never like this. Rumors spread quickly, as they always do in wild places. The park's hiking forums filled with speculation. Had Marcus fallen into an invisible crevasse and then been covered by fresh rock? Had he faked his own disappearance, erasing his tracks to escape some unknown threat or unfinished matter? Had he been attacked by an unusual animal, perhaps a pack of wolves or a grizzly, without leaving blood or signs of struggle? Or, as some whispered in the digital community, had he become the victim of one of the infamous lost time phenomena that experienced Alaskans occasionally describe? Strange gaps in memory, temporal jumps, travelers losing hours or days without any explanation. Marcus's family refused interviews with major media outlets, but his mother posted an open letter on the AR/Alaska Outdoors subreddit. Marcus was careful, intelligent, and respected wild places more than anyone I know. He found peace in places most people considered terrifying. If you were the last person who spoke with him, if you saw anything strange, no matter how small it seems, please let us know. We just want answers. The people who had seen him at Wonder Lake quietly volunteered in later searches. Each time the weather fought against them, and each time the camp they found remained exactly as Marcus had left it. Only the wildlife seemed to slowly reclaim the place. Wolf tracks, bear scat, bird nests scattered among the bushes. During a later inspection, Alan left a note clipped with a carabiner in case Marcus ever returned. "You have not been forgotten." He also took a photograph of the area from an angle that matched Marcus's final selfie and posted it beside the original for his followers. The only difference was the sky, now covered with clouds, and the empty world of that smiling hiker who had vanished. The debate over the case of Marcus Davidson has never quieted down. On the first anniversary of his disappearance, daring admirers and internet investigators organized a digital map of Marcus, gathering every sighting, every clue, and every theory, from the most pragmatic to the most fantastical. Missing 411 researchers and wilderness bloggers cited his story in warnings about Alaska's unique ability to erase a person quickly and without explanation. Some searchers and rangers still return to the valley when their routes cross Denali, driven less by the hope of rescue than by the need to honor the lost. They speak of the cold that seems to descend suddenly at the foot of the glacier. They mention the unsettling silence at Marcus's last known camp, and they speak of an unspoken but almost universal feeling that in Alaska sometimes the wilderness keeps what belongs to it. What remains are questions, digital breadcrumbs in a void where a living person once walked. Some maintain that the final image uploaded to his cloud, filtered and saturated with that strange vertical blur, was nothing more than a camera glitch. Others claim it is proof of the unknown, a lingering enigma carved into the unforgiving tundra. Marcus Davidson, the overconfident hiker, walked into a landscape known for not surrendering its mysteries, and somewhere between his final words and that empty camp, he became one of its unresolved disappearances. To this day, his tent, recovered by his family and quietly preserved, remains sealed in storage. Its fabric is still covered with fine Alaskan silt, a silent artifact left behind by a man whose footprints simply stopped. And somehow that uncertainty is the most disturbing part, because what happened to Marcus could, under the right combination of courage and misfortune, happen to anyone who sets foot in the wild heart of Alaska, daring to go just a little farther than the world can follow. Story 3. When Jennifer Kowalski, a wildlife photographer from Milwaukee, packed her bags for a month-long expedition through Alaska in September 2023, she had no way of knowing she was stepping into a mystery that would end up consuming 3 generations of her family. At 41 years old, Jennifer had earned a reputation for capturing some of nature's most elusive moments. Wolves hunting beneath the full moon, eagles descending through morning fog, the exact instant when lightning illuminates a storm cloud. Her work had appeared on the covers of National Geographic and Outdoor Life, but it was her obsession with the aurora borealis that finally drew her toward the last frontier. Jennifer's fascination with the Northern Lights had begun in childhood, sparked by a documentary her grandmother showed her about the indigenous peoples of Alaska and the legends surrounding the dancing spirits of the sky. For years, she had photographed auroras in Montana, Wyoming, and northern Canada. However, Alaska represented the ultimate goal, the place where the lights burned brightest and most unpredictably. Her plan was ambitious, a solo month-long expedition during peak aurora season, traveling between remote locations far from any light pollution, using specialized long-exposure equipment to capture images no one had ever achieved before. Her husband, David, opposed the trip at first. Jennifer had a history of pushing her limits too far. On one occasion, she spent 3 weeks alone in Yellowstone following a specific pack of wolves. On another, she camped for 10 days in the middle of a Montana blizzard to photograph a rare atmospheric phenomenon. But Alaska was different. The distances were immense, the weather unpredictable, and the isolation absolute. Jennifer assured him that she would check in by satellite phone every 48 hours and that she would carry 2 emergency beacons. She had researched every aspect of the route, from weather patterns to wildlife migration paths, and had even hired a local guide for the most remote sections. On September 12th, Jennifer landed in Fairbanks with 4 cases of photography equipment, extreme weather clothing rated to withstand -40 degrees, and a specially modified truck with an observation platform on the roof. Her first week was productive. She captured stunning images near Chena Hot Springs and sent David photographs of the aurora, unlike anything she had ever included in her portfolio before. The lights were particularly active during those days, stretching across the entire sky in green and purple curtains that she described as if they were breathing. Her first scheduled check-in arrived on time. Her voice sounded excited, though professional, as she described the clarity of the northern sky and her plans to head farther north toward the Dalton Highway. She mentioned that the aurora forecasts were predicting an unusual solar storm pattern, one capable of producing displays seen only once in a decade. Jennifer had decided to extend her route north to take advantage of those conditions. By September 20th, Jennifer had established a base camp near Coldfoot, a tiny settlement along the Dalton Highway that served as a resupply point for truckers heading to the oil fields of the North Slope. The few residents who met her remembered her enthusiasm and her impressive photography equipment, thousands of dollars in cameras and accessories that she handled with the care of a master craftswoman. She spent 2 nights in the local camp store showing other travelers her first photographs and explaining her techniques for capturing the movement of the aurora. Her next communication came on September 23rd, but something had changed. Jennifer's voice on the satellite phone sounded tense, almost breathless. She told David that she was observing unusual formations in the auroras, patterns that did not match any scientific description she had ever studied. She said the light seemed to respond to her presence, becoming more active when she set up her cameras and dimming when she moved away. David would later describe that call as deeply unsettling. He said Jennifer sounded excited and frightened at the same time, as if she had discovered something she could not fully explain. That was the last time anyone heard Jennifer Kowalski's voice. When she failed to make her scheduled check-in on September 25th, David immediately contacted the Alaska State Troopers. The search began within hours, centered on the area around Coldfoot, where she was last known to have camped. The terrain north of the Arctic Circle is unforgiving. Rolling tundra interrupted by deep ravines, countless small lakes, and weather that can shift from clear skies to zero visibility conditions in only minutes. Search teams found Jennifer's truck on September 28th, parked on a rarely used access road about 15 miles northeast of Coldfoot. The vehicle was open, with no signs of a struggle or mechanical problems. Her camping gear was still inside, along with most of her cold weather clothing. What unsettled the searchers most was that her main photography equipment was missing. Thousands of dollars in specialized gear that Jennifer would never have abandoned voluntarily. The discovery that froze the search team came nearly 2 miles from the truck. Jennifer's main camera, a high-end digital model worth more than many cars, was found partially buried in the soft tundra, more than 8 miles from the truck and near the line of small lakes indicated by her final GPS records. as if someone had deliberately placed it there. The camera was not damaged and still contained its memory card. When investigators reviewed the images, they found hundreds of aurora photographs, each one more spectacular than the last. But it was the final series of photographs that defied all explanation. The last 47 images on Jennifer's camera showed the aurora borealis, forming shapes that atmospheric scientists insisted on classifying as impossible. Instead of the typical luminous curtains or spiral patterns, the lights composed defined geometric forms, perfect triangles, interlocking hexagons, and complex mathematical patterns that seemed to pulse with an intentional rhythm. Even more disturbing were the final 12 photographs, which appeared to show humanoid silhouettes inside the aurora itself, dark figures that seemed to move independently of the light patterns surrounding them. Digital analysis performed by the FBI's technical team confirmed that the images had not been manipulated. The metadata showed that they were taken over a 6-hour period on the night of September 24th, with timestamps indicating that Jennifer had been photographing continuously from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. The progression of the images suggested that she had been moving steadily north across the tundra, following the auroras as they shifted position in the sky. The most disturbing discovery came from the camera's GPS data. The coordinates showed that Jennifer had traveled in a perfectly straight line for more than 8 miles across terrain that would have been almost impossible to cross in the dark, even with night vision equipment. That line of travel led directly toward a series of small lakes that were completely frozen, despite how early it was in the season. Local Inupiat elders consulted by the search team pointed out that the lakes Jennifer had been heading toward were traditionally considered taboo, places where their ancestors believed the spirits of the aurora descended to rest during the day. Ground searches in the area revealed Jennifer's footprints, clearly identifiable by the distinctive pattern of her photography boots. The tracks began at her truck and followed the same path north indicated by the GPS data from her camera. But as in so many other Alaskan disappearance cases, the footprints simply ended. At the shore of the largest lake, Jennifer's tracks approached the ice and then disappeared completely. There were no signs that the ice had broken, no evidence that she had fallen into the water, and no footprints leading away in any direction. Dive teams eventually inspected the lake once the ice grew thicker, but they found no trace of Jennifer or her missing equipment. The bottom of the lake was surprisingly deep and clear, with the visibility wide enough for searchers to verify that there was nothing there to find. However, the underwater search did reveal one peculiar detail. At the bottom of the lake was a perfect circle, approximately 50 feet in diameter, where no vegetation grew. It was as if the lakebed had been burned or treated with some kind of chemical substance. Jennifer's family hired private investigators, who spent months following every possible lead. They interviewed truckers who traveled the Dalton Highway, contacted amateur aurora photographers who might have been in the area, and even consulted researchers dedicated to studying electromagnetic phenomena in the Arctic. None of those investigations produced concrete answers. The case attracted the attention of paranormal investigators and unidentified flying object specialists, who pointed to the strange aurora formations in Jennifer's final photographs as possible evidence of extraterrestrial contact. Mainstream scientists dismissed those theories, but they also could not offer alternative explanations for the geometric light patterns or for the humanoid silhouettes captured in her images. More unsettling were the reports that began to emerge from other aurora photographers. Several people contacted authorities claiming to have experienced similar phenomena, auroras that seemed to respond to their presence, geometric patterns that did not appear in scientific literature, and an overwhelming compulsion to follow the lights farther north than they had planned. Auroras that seemed to respond to their presence, geometric patterns that did not appear in scientific literature, and an overwhelming compulsion to follow the lights farther north than they had planned. The scientific community remained divided regarding Jennifer's photographs. Some atmospheric physicists suggested that the unusual formations could be explained by rare magnetic field interactions during the solar storm period. Others pointed out that auroras are constantly photographed by automated cameras throughout Alaska, and none had ever recorded similar geometric patterns. The humanoid silhouettes were generally dismissed as pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces and figures in random patterns. David Kowalski disagreed. He spent the first anniversary of Jennifer's disappearance in Alaska, retracing her route and interviewing anyone who might have information. He described feeling an inexplicable pull toward the north during his stay there, and claimed that the auroras he witnessed seemed to move with unusual purpose and intelligence. Over time, he established a foundation that offered rewards for any information about Jennifer's fate, but the leads gradually dried up. Jennifer's camera, with its impossible final images, remains stored as evidence in the possession of the Alaska State Troopers. From time to time, researchers request access to study the photographs, but none has provided a satisfactory explanation for what Jennifer captured during her final hours. The images have been shared in academic articles about atmospheric phenomena, always accompanied by careful warnings about their unexplained nature. Local guides in the Coldfoot area now tell Jennifer's story to tourists, usually as a warning about the importance of respecting the power of Alaska's wilderness. But some of the older guides, especially those with indigenous heritage, tell a different version. They speak of the aurora as living entities, ancient spirits that sometimes call to humans sensitive enough to perceive them. According to that interpretation, Jennifer did not disappear. She was chosen, selected by forces that exist beyond human understanding to join something greater than herself. Whether viewed through science or spirituality, the disappearance of Jennifer Kowalski remains one of Alaska's most baffling cases. Her final photographs remain the only evidence of her last hours, cryptic images that raise more questions than they answer. Somewhere in the vast expanse of northern Alaska, beyond the reach of search teams and satellite phones, lies the answer to what happened when an accomplished photographer followed the dancing lights too far into the darkness. Until that answer is found, Jennifer's story serves as a reminder that Alaska holds mysteries that may be beyond human comprehension, and that some obsessions carry a price impossible to calculate until it is already too late to pay it. Story 4. Dr. Elizabeth Martinez had led dozens of archaeological expeditions throughout the Americas, but the 3-month dig in northern Alaska would call into question everything she believed she knew about human history. At 43 years old, she was considered one of the leading experts on pre-Columbian Arctic cultures. She held a doctorate from Stanford and had 20 years of fieldwork experience that had taken her from the Canadian tundra to the remote islands of the Bering Sea. Her reputation for meticulous documentation and scientific rigor had earned her a prestigious grant from the National Science Foundation to investigate what satellite imagery suggested might be the oldest human settlement ever discovered in North America. The site was located in the Brooks Range, approximately 200 miles north of Fairbanks, and could only be reached by helicopter during the brief summer season. Initial ground-penetrating radar surveys had revealed structures buried beneath the permafrost that appeared to predate known indigenous settlements by thousands of years. If the preliminary data was correct, the discovery could completely rewrite the timeline of human migration into the Americas. Elizabeth assembled a carefully selected team for the expedition. Dr. James Chen, a soil analyst from UC Berkeley, whose expertise in dating organic materials was unmatched. Sarah Blackwood, a graduate student in anthropology at Harvard, who had spent 2 summers working at Arctic sites in Siberia. Tommy Yazzie, a Navajo archaeologist and survival expert, whose knowledge of traditional indigenous technologies would be essential for interpreting any artifacts they might discover. And finally, Dr. Andreas Petro, a geologist from the University of Alaska, whose understanding of permafrost dynamics would prove crucial for planning the excavations. The team established its base camp on June 15, 2023, setting up a sophisticated research station with satellite communications, portable laboratory equipment, and enough emergency supplies for 3 months of independence. The site was located on an elevated plateau overlooking the Koyuk River, with clearings marked for helicopter landings intended for weekly supply deliveries and emergency evacuations if necessary. The first month progressed exactly as expected. Careful excavation revealed what appeared to be extremely ancient stone tools and fragments of carved bone. Elizabeth's daily reports to the National Science Foundation described revolutionary findings, although they still required thorough verification. The artifacts showed manufacturing techniques that did not match any known Arctic culture, with tool designs that seemed to combine elements from various traditions around the world in ways that should not have been possible according to the accepted timeline of human migration. By mid-July, the team's discoveries had become increasingly baffling. They unearthed structures built from precisely fitted stone blocks, construction methods that required engineering knowledge supposedly unknown to prehistoric Arctic peoples. Even more unsettling were the carved symbols that appeared on many of the artifacts. Complex geometric patterns that seemed to represent mathematical concepts far more advanced than anything associated with the earliest human settlements in the region. Elizabeth's communications with the outside world began to take on an excited but increasingly confused tone. Her July 20th satellite call with her department chair at Columbia University lasted more than an hour. During that conversation, she described findings that challenged fundamental assumptions about the development of human civilization. She mentioned the discovery of what appeared to be astronomical calculation tools and metallurgical evidence, suggesting that these ancient peoples had access to techniques that would not appear elsewhere until thousands of years later. The team's last scheduled communication came on August 3rd. Elizabeth's voice during that satellite call sounded tense and hurried, as if she were struggling to contain her excitement while, at the same time, fighting growing confusion. She reported that the team had discovered what appeared to be a burial chamber containing artifacts impossible to explain. Tools made from materials that should not have existed in prehistoric Alaska, including what appeared to be refined metals and work stones with properties their portable testing equipment could not identify. More concerning was Elizabeth's description of the effect the site was having on the team members. She mentioned that everyone was experiencing unusually vivid dreams, always with the same images: vast cities built into mountainsides, complex ceremonies performed by figures wearing elaborate masks, and a recurring sense of being watched by ancient eyes. Tommy Yazy had become convinced that the site was sacred ground and should not be disturbed. Meanwhile, Dr. Chen had begun reporting equipment failures that consistently produced impossible dates when performing. Carbon tests on organic materials extracted from the deepest levels of the excavation. When the team failed to make its scheduled communication on August 10th, the National Science Foundation contacted the helicopter transport service to perform a welfare check. The pilot found the base camp on August 12th, but what he discovered there defied all explanation. The camp appeared to have been abandoned in a hurry. Expensive equipment was still powered on, and personal belongings were scattered around, as if the team members had suddenly walked away in the middle of their daily activities. The excavation site itself was the most baffling aspect of the discovery. The careful archaeological grid Elizabeth's team had established was gone. In its place was a circular excavation descending far deeper than any trench previously opened. The walls of this new excavation were perfectly smooth, as if they had been cut with precision machinery, and the spiral geometric pattern carved into them matched the symbols found on the artifacts described by the team in its reports. The Alaska State Troopers immediately launched a search and rescue operation, but found no trace of the 5 team members. Their personal equipment was cataloged and showed no signs of struggle or emergency. The individual tents contained belongings arranged neatly, as if their owners had simply stepped away for a moment. Dr. Martinez's field journals were found open to entries describing increasingly impossible discoveries, with handwriting that became more erratic as the pages progressed. The final journal entry, dated August 9th, described the team's decision to dig deeper into what Elizabeth called the central chamber. She wrote about finding carved stone panels that appeared to depict star maps, showing constellations in positions that would not occur until thousands of years in the future. Even more disturbing was her description of preserved organic materials that, according to the carbon dating equipment, were simultaneously ancient beyond measurement and impossibly recent. Most unsettling of all was Elizabeth's final written observation. "The site is not what we thought. We are not the first to find this place. The previous investigators never left. Tonight we understand why. Search teams from the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center spent 3 weeks tracking the area around the site with helicopters, ground crews, and specialized equipment for locating people in wilderness conditions. Despite covering more than 300 square miles of territory, they never found any trace of the missing researchers. The harsh Arctic environment could explain bodies disappearing, but not the absolute absence of any evidence that 5 people had walked away from their camp. The National Science Foundation sealed the site and classified all materials related to the expedition. Official reports described the disappearance as likely caused by catastrophic weather phenomena or encounters with wildlife. However, internal documents obtained years later through Freedom of Information Act requests revealed that investigators considered the conditions at the site inexplicable. The smooth walls of the excavation showed no tool marks compatible with any known excavation equipment, and the geometric patterns carved into the stone required a level of precision the team's tools could not have achieved. Even more unsettling were the artifacts recovered from the sealed site. The objects Elizabeth's team had described in their reports were found arranged in complex patterns around the central excavation, placed in ways that seemed to represent star charts and mathematical equations. When examined by experts, these arrangements demonstrated knowledge of advanced astronomical phenomena that would not be discovered by conventional science until several decades later. Independent researchers who later studied the case discovered that the location in the Brooks Range had been the subject of indigenous warnings for generations. Local Gwich'in elders spoke of the area as a place where time behaved differently, where ancient spirits still walked, and where those who disturbed certain places could find themselves traveling between worlds. These oral traditions, dismissed by earlier scientific expeditions, described phenomena remarkably similar to those Elizabeth's team had reported in their final communications. The families of the missing researchers eventually created a private foundation offering rewards for information about their fate, but no credible leads ever emerged. The site remains under federal protection, officially closed due to dangerous geological conditions. Even so, satellite imagery shows that the excavation continues expanding on its own, following the same geometric patterns the research team had documented. Tamayazi's family, drawing on Navajo traditions about sacred places and spiritual boundaries, held their own ceremony at the site 1 year after his disappearance. The medicine man who led the ceremony later described sensing the presence of people existing between the time that was and the time that will be, trapped in a place where different eras crossed. Today, the case of Dr. Elizabeth Martinez and her research team serves as a cautionary story within the archaeological community about the dangers of Arctic fieldwork. Although the official version focuses on environmental risks rather than the inexplicable evidence found at the site, the artifacts recovered from the excavation remain stored in federal facilities, studied by researchers required to sign confidentiality agreements about their findings. The mystery of what happened to 5 experienced scientists at a remote northern Alaskan dig site continues to challenge both scientific understanding and traditional explanations for wilderness disappearances. Whether they encountered some unknown natural phenomenon, stumbled upon evidence of civilizations that official history cannot admit, or crossed into something that exists beyond the normal limits of time and space, their fate remains one of Alaska's most baffling unsolved cases. Their final discovery, that the ancient sites seem to exist simultaneously in multiple time periods, suggests that some of Alaska's mysteries may be too vast and too dangerous for human understanding, and that the last frontier holds secrets that may be better left buried beneath the permafrost, where they have waited for thousands of years. Story 5. Tyler Rodriguez, known to his 2.3 million subscribers as Alaska Beast, had built his entire YouTube channel around extreme wilderness challenges. But his final video series would end up becoming the most watched disappearance documentary on the platform. At 29 years old, Tyler represented the new generation of extreme content creators, fearless, technologically skilled, and driven by an insatiable need to push limits for an increasingly demanding audience. His channel showed him surviving in remote places across North America, from Death Valley heat waves to Canadian blizzards, always filming himself with multiple cameras to capture every moment of suffering and triumph. Tyler grew up in Los Angeles, the son of a film studio technician and a yoga instructor, surrounded by the entertainment industry's obsession with spectacle and audience engagement. After dropping out of film school, he launched his YouTube channel with a simple premise. He would survive in the world's most dangerous environments using minimal gear while documenting every moment. His early videos showed authentic survival skills, learned from military consultants and wilderness experts. But as his subscriber count increased, so did the pressure to produce increasingly extreme content. By 2024, Tyler's channel was generating substantial income through sponsorships, merchandise, and YouTube's monetization program. He lived comfortably in a Marina del Rey apartment filled with outdoor gear and editing tools. However, his content had begun to feel repetitive. Audience retention metrics showed declining interest in his usual desert and mountain survival videos. Tyler needed something bigger, more dangerous, more remote than anything he had attempted before. Alaska represented the ultimate challenge, vast, unforgiving, and mysterious enough to capture his audience's imagination. His plan was ambitious, even by his own standards. A 30-day solo survival challenge in one of Alaska's most remote wilderness areas, armed only with basic tools and multiple cameras to document every aspect of the experience. Tyler spent months researching locations until he finally chose a region inside Wrangell St. Elias National Park, hundreds of miles from the nearest road or settlement. The area was known for its unpredictable weather, dangerous wildlife, and terrain that tested even experienced mountaineers. Tyler's promotional campaign for the series generated enormous anticipation among his subscribers. He posted daily preparation videos, showing his gear selection, survival training, and physical conditioning regimen. The comment sections filled with both supportive messages and warnings from viewers, including several Alaskans who begged him to reconsider the dangers of the location. Tyler's response was as confident as always. Fear is just excitement without breathing. Alaska Beast doesn't run from challenges. He runs toward them. He arrived in Alaska on September 5, 2024, landing in Anchorage with 6 waterproof camera cases and enough survival gear to sustain himself for the planned 30 days. His final video from civilization, filmed at Ted Stevens International Airport, showed Tyler's usual arrogance mixed with genuine nervous excitement. He promised his audience the most extreme survival content ever created, joking that maybe he would come out of the wilderness with a full beard and a dozen new scars to brag about. The helicopter drop-off on September 8th marked the beginning of Tyler's documentation. His first video, uploaded through a satellite internet connection, showed him establishing a base camp in a valley surrounded by glacial peaks. The footage maintained his usual professional quality: multiple camera angles, crisp audio commentary, and the sweeping establishing shots that had made his channel famous. Tyler seemed confident and well-prepared, describing his planned route and daily survival goals with the enthusiasm that had attracted millions of followers. During the first week, Tyler's daily uploads kept their typical format. He built shelter, searched for edible plants, attempted to fish, and offered educational explanations about wilderness survival techniques. The videos showed him facing weather challenges, equipment issues, and the psychological stress of absolute isolation. Subscriber engagement remained high, with comments praising his skills and encouraging him to go even deeper into the wilderness. The first signs of trouble appeared in his September 16th video. Tyler's usual confidence seemed forced, and he mentioned that he was having strange dreams and the feeling that someone was watching him. He attributed the impression to the stress of isolation and the hypervigilance necessary to survive in the wilderness. But more attentive viewers noticed subtle changes in his behavior. He spoke faster, frequently looked over his shoulder, and seemed to forget details he had mentioned in previous videos. By September 20th, Tyler's content had taken on a distinctly different tone. His videos became longer and less structured, filled with rambling comments about strange sounds he heard at night and unusual animal behavior in the area. He claimed that wolves were following him, always staying out of reach of his cameras but making their presence known through howls and movements in the peripheral brush. Tyler began setting up several cameras around his sleeping area, hoping to capture evidence of the coordination he believed the local wildlife was showing. The September 23rd video marked a dramatic shift in Tyler's psychological state. The footage showed him visibly shaken, describing how his campfire had been deliberately scattered during the night by something that left no tracks. He claimed that his food cache had been disturbed in ways that suggested intelligent manipulation, not simple animal scavenging. Most unsettling was his insistence that they were learning his routines, adapting their behavior to always stay ahead of his camera coverage. Tyler's last coherent upload came on September 26th. The 18-minute video showed him dismantling his established camp and moving to what he called a more defensible position higher up in the valley. His narration was increasingly paranoid. He described a coordinated effort by the local wildlife to drive him out of the area. He claimed the ravens were acting as scouts, that bears were pushing him toward specific locations, and even that the terrain itself seemed to change when he was not looking directly at it. The video that would become an internet legend was uploaded automatically on September 28th, triggered by Tyler's camera system emergency protocol when he failed to make a manual upload for 48 hours. The footage, recorded with a handheld camera, showed Tyler running through dense forest in an obvious state of panic. His breathing was heavy, and his normally articulate commentary had been reduced to desperate fragments of observation. "They're coordinating," he gasped between breaths. "Look at the trees. Look at the shadows. They're hurting me." The final minutes of the video showed Tyler reaching a rocky outcrop where he tried to make a stand. He set the camera down to record while gathering stones as improvised weapons, narrating the entire time about the watchers approaching from every direction. The video ended abruptly with Tyler screaming and the camera falling to the ground, capturing only the sky and treetops before the battery died. Search and rescue operations began immediately when Tyler's emergency beacon activated automatically. The signal led rescuers to his final camp on the exposed ridge of a mountain, approximately 15 miles from his planned route. What they found there had no simple explanation. Tyler's final camp showed signs of hurried abandonment, with expensive camera equipment scattered across a wide area, as if it had been thrown or dropped during a desperate retreat. The most puzzling discovery was the drone footage captured by the search team. Tyler's final camp was located at the center of what appeared to be a perfect circle of disturbed vegetation, approximately 590 feet in diameter. The trees inside the circle showed damage at consistent heights, as if something large had moved through the area in systematic patterns. Wildlife biologists consulted during the search could not explain the uniformity of the disturbance, or identify what could have caused damage that was so extensive yet organized. The search expanded to cover more than 300 square miles, using helicopters, ground teams, and specialized tracking dogs. Despite the enormous effort, no trace of Tyler Rodriguez was ever found. His emergency beacon was found still functioning on the ridge where he had established his final camp, but Tyler had disappeared completely. The beacon's GPS log showed impossible movement patterns during his final hours, rapid movements across terrain that would have required vehicles or aircraft to cross. Tyler's YouTube channel became the center of intense scrutiny as investigators and amateur detectives analyzed every frame of his final videos. Digital forensic experts examined the material for signs of editing or manipulation, but found nothing to suggest the videos were anything other than genuine documentation of Tyler's mental deterioration and final disappearance. More unsettling were the discoveries made through enhanced audio analysis of his final videos. When the background noise was filtered and amplified, investigators found sounds that seemed to support Tyler's claims about coordinated wildlife behavior. Several animal calls appeared to answer one another in patterns that suggested communication, not random vocalizations. Even more disturbing were certain sounds that seemed mechanical, rhythmic clicks and hums with no obvious natural source. The case attracted the attention of paranormal investigators, cryptozoologists, and conspiracy theorists, who pointed to Tyler's documentation as possible evidence of unknown phenomena in the Alaskan wilderness. Mainstream scientists dismissed those interpretations, attributing Tyler's experiences to isolation, psychosis, and environmental stress. However, several wildlife biologists admitted that the coordinated animal behavior described by Tyler, while extremely unusual, was not completely outside the realm of possibility. Tyler's family created a foundation offering substantial rewards for information about his fate, but no credible leads ever appeared. The YouTube channel remained active, generating revenue from the millions of views his final videos continued to attract. His disappearance gave rise to countless reaction videos, analysis channels, and documentary series, making Alaska Beast more famous in death than he had ever been in life. The region of Wrangell St. Elias, where Tyler disappeared, has since become a pilgrimage site for his fans and for extreme content creators attempting to recreate his journey. Park rangers report an increase in rescue calls from YouTubers and social media influencers who underestimate the dangers of the area while trying to capitalize on Tyler's legend. Several have had to be evacuated after experiencing symptoms similar to those Tyler documented: paranoia, insomnia, and reports of unusual animal behavior. Today, Tyler Rodriguez's final video series serves as both entertainment and a warning about the dangers of extreme content creation. His disappearance highlights the thin line between legitimate wilderness survival and reckless risk-taking, while also raising uncomfortable questions about the responsibility of an audience when creators risk their lives for views and engagement. The mystery of what happened to Alaska Beast during his final hours in the Alaskan wilderness remains unresolved. Whether he succumbed to environmental factors, experienced a complete psychological breakdown, or encountered something that exists beyond current scientific understanding, his fate serves as a harsh reminder that Alaska's vast wilderness contains dangers that no preparation or recording equipment can overcome. In the end, the last frontier claimed another victim, leaving behind only digital fragments of a man who ventured too far into places where human beings were never meant to go alone. Story 6. The Brennan family reunion was supposed to heal old wounds and bring together 4 generations scattered across the United States. But their chartered fishing trip near the Aleutian Islands would end up creating a mystery that still haunts Alaska to this day. The reunion had been 3 years in the making and had been organized by the family matriarch, Eleanor Brennan, a 78-year-old retired librarian from Portland, Oregon, who was determined to gather her extended family before age and distance made that kind of gathering impossible. The Brennan clan had spread across the continent over the decades. Eleanor's 3 children had settled in different states after college. Her daughter Margaret lived in Seattle, where she worked as a marine biologist. Her son Patrick lived in Denver, running a construction company, and the youngest, Thomas, taught at a high school in Atlanta. Each of them had married and built families of their own, creating a network of 12 members who rarely saw one another except at weddings and funerals. Eleanor's vision was simple: a week together in Alaska, sharing an adventure capable of creating lasting memories and closing the gaps that time and geography had opened between them. The family's choice of Alaska was influenced by Margaret's experience with marine ecosystems and her contacts within the fishing industry. She arranged the rental of a 42-foot fishing vessel, the Kodiak Dream, captained by a respected local operator named Victor Peterson. Victor had spent more than 20 years running fishing excursions in Alaskan waters, with an impeccable safety record and intimate knowledge of the waters around the Aleutian Islands. The plan was to spend 5 days fishing for halibut and salmon while enjoying the spectacular scenery of one of the most remote maritime regions in the world. The family gathered in Anchorage on July 18, 2024, representing 4 generations of the Brennans. Eleanor, despite her age, showed remarkable energy and enthusiasm for the adventure. Her children, 51-year-old Margaret, 48-year-old Patrick, and 45-year-old Thomas, each arrived with their respective families. Margaret's twin daughters, both graduate students in marine science, were excited to see their grandmother's adventurous spirit up close. Patrick brought his wife and teenage son, while Thomas was accompanied by his husband, their 2 adopted children, ages 8 and 10, and a teenage niece who had been living with them for several years. The group flew to Dutch Harbor on July 20th, where they met Captain Peterson and toured the Kodiak Dream. The vessel was well maintained and properly equipped for extended offshore fishing trips. It had cabins for 12 passengers, modern navigation equipment, and all required safety gear. including emergency beacons and life rafts. Victor gave a complete safety briefing, detailing emergency procedures and weather protocols with a professional competence that reassured even the most nervous members of the family. The first 2 days of the trip exceeded every expectation. The weather was unusually calm for the notoriously difficult waters around the Aleutian Islands, and the fishing was exceptional. Relatives who had not spoken in months found themselves working together to pull in enormous halibut, while the children were delighted by sightings of whales, sea otters, and countless seabirds. Eleanor turned out to be a surprisingly skilled fisherwoman, catching the largest fish of the first day and earning affectionate teasing from her grandchildren about beginner's luck. On the evening of July 22nd, the Kodiak Dream was anchored in a sheltered cove on the south side of Unalaska Island, about 40 miles from Dutch Harbor. The family had just finished a dinner of freshly caught salmon prepared by Thomas, who had trained as a chef before becoming a teacher. Captain Peterson's log, recovered later, indicated calm seas, clear skies, and ideal conditions for fishing the following day. The final entry, made at 9:30 p.m., noted that all 12 passengers were present and preparing to sleep after what he described as one of the most successful family trips he had ever guided. The Coast Guard received the automatic distress signal from the Kodiak Dream at 3:47 a.m. on July 23rd. The signal, transmitted by the vessel's emergency position indicating radio beacon, indicated that the boat was approximately 15 miles northeast of its last known position and moving at an impossible speed of more than 60 knots. Coast Guard radar operators initially dismissed the reading as an equipment failure, since no vessel of the Kodiak Dream's size and configuration could maintain such a speed in open sea conditions. When repeated attempts to contact Captain Peterson by radio failed, the Coast Guard sent a helicopter from Dutch Harbor to investigate. The crew found the Kodiak Dream at 6:15 a.m., drifting in calm waters, with the engines idling and the navigation lights still on. From the air, the vessel appeared completely normal, but radio contact attempts continued to go unanswered. The helicopter crew reported seeing no signs of life on deck, although the boat's configuration made it impossible to observe the inside of the wheelhouse or the lodging areas from above. The Coast Guard cutter Mellon reached the Kodiak Dream at 8:30 a.m. and immediately sent over a boarding party. What they found aboard the empty vessel defied every expectation and every protocol they had been trained for. The boat was in perfect condition. It showed no signs of emergency, damage, or struggle. The engines were functioning normally. All navigation equipment was operational, and the vessel's systems indicated no mechanical problems. Most baffling was the state of the passengers' belongings. Every personal item remained exactly where it should have been. Clothing was carefully folded in the cabins. Glasses and books were placed neatly on nightstands. Cameras and fishing gear were stored in their proper places. The galley showed signs of breakfast preparation, coffee already measured in the coffee maker, and bread laid out for toasting. Nothing suggested a hurried departure or an emergency evacuation. However, all 13 life jackets had disappeared from their storage compartments, even though regulations required them to remain on board unless they were being worn. The life rafts were still in place and had not been deployed, but their inspection records indicated that they had been tampered with at some point during the night. Even more unsettling was the discovery that the boat's emergency radio had been switched to a frequency not used by any known maritime service, and that the GPS system showed a navigation route in a perfect geometric pattern. A series of interlocking circles covering approximately 200 square miles of ocean. The Coast Guard investigation revealed that the Kodiak Dream had traveled that geometric pattern between midnight and 3:47 a.m., maintaining precise headings and speeds that would have required constant manual navigation adjustments. The pattern was too complex and exact to be the result of an autopilot failure or drifting. However, no human operator could have maintained that level of precision while also controlling 12 passengers in what must have been an increasingly confusing situation. Maritime salvage experts who boarded the vessel to examine it found evidence that someone had made extensive modifications to the navigation systems during the final hours. Additional equipment had been connected to the GPS and radar through links that required advanced technical knowledge. The modifications appeared designed to track and record specific oceanographic data, but the purpose and origin of the equipment could not be determined. The search for the missing members of the Brennan family became one of the largest maritime rescue operations in Alaska's history. Coast Guard vessels, aircraft, and civilian volunteers covered thousands of square miles of ocean, following every possible drift pattern and survival scenario. Ocean current models were calculated backward from the place where the Kodiak Dream was discovered, in order to determine where 12 people wearing life jackets might have entered the water. But the search areas generated by those models produced no results. Underwater surveys conducted with sonar and remotely operated vehicles found no evidence of the family on the seafloor in the areas where, in theory, they might have sunk. The water depth in the search region, more than 2,000 feet deep in many areas, made a complete inspection of the bottom impossible. Even so, the absence of any debris or belongings floating on the surface suggested that the family had not simply fallen or jumped overboard. The case attracted national attention as investigators struggled to develop theories capable of explaining the physical evidence. The geometric navigation pattern suggested sophisticated technical knowledge, or some form of external control over the vessel's movement. The missing life jackets indicated that the family had prepared to enter the water, but their organized departure from a seaworthy boat in safe conditions and calm seas made no rational sense. Maritime accident investigators consulted experts in fields ranging from navigation electronics to mass psychology, searching for explanations of how 13 people could disappear from a functioning vessel without leaving any trace of their method of departure or destination. Some theories focused on the possibility of piracy or human trafficking, but the remote location and lack of valuable cargo made those scenarios unlikely. Others pointed to collective suicide or cult-like behavior, but relatives who knew the Brennans insisted that such explanations were impossible because of their close relationships and stable lives. The most disturbing discovery came with the analysis of the Kodiak Dream's electronic systems. Maritime forensic experts found that the vessel's computers had recorded extensive environmental data during the hours when the family disappeared. Water temperature, salinity, magnetic field variations, and atmospheric conditions. The data collection appeared to follow scientific protocols, as if the boat had been converted into a research platform for studying oceanic phenomena. Even more baffling were the anomalous readings within that environmental data, which matched exactly with the moments when the boat was traveling its geometric pattern. The magnetic field measurements showed fluctuations that oceanographic experts insisted were impossible in open sea conditions. At the same time, the water temperature readings indicated variations that would have required enormous underwater thermal events. The equipment recording this data was standard maritime technology, which made instrumental error an unlikely sufficient explanation. Eleanor Brennan's church in Portland organized prayer vigils and fundraising efforts to support continued searches, while Patrick's construction company hired private investigators to follow leads that official agencies could not investigate. Margaret's colleagues in marine biology established a reward fund for information leading to any trace of the missing family members. But despite the broad public coverage, no credible lead ever appeared. The disappearance of the Brennan family became a cautionary story in maritime safety courses, although instructors had difficulty identifying specific lessons that could prevent similar incidents. The case highlighted the ocean's ability to claim lives without explanation, but the organized nature of the disappearance and the evidence of technical modifications to the vessel suggested something far more complex than a typical maritime accident. Today, the Kodiak Dream remains in a Coast Guard impound facility in Kodiak, Alaska, preserved as evidence in a case that is still technically active, although in practice it appears unsolvable. From time to time, maritime investigators request access to study the vessel's modified navigation systems, but none has offered an explanation for the electronic alterations or for the geometric navigation pattern that marked the family's final hours. The waters around the Aleutian Islands continue to attract fishing excursions, charter vessels, and recreational boaters. However, many captains now avoid the specific area where the Kodiak Dream was found drifting and empty. Local sailors speak quietly about unusual electronic readings and navigation anomalies in the region, although official maritime authorities maintain that there are no active hazards in the area. The Brennan family reunion, conceived to unite 4 generations through a shared adventure and renewed family bonds, ended up creating one of Alaska's most persistent maritime mysteries. 12 people seeking family connection and ocean adventure simply vanished from a seaworthy vessel in calm conditions, leaving behind only questions, empty life jacket compartments, and a navigation route suggesting that their final hours involved something far beyond ordinary human experience. In the vast waters of the Aleutian Islands, where ocean currents carry secrets into depths that may never be explored, the Brennan family joined the countless mysteries that Alaska's waters preserve forever. Story 7. Former Navy SEAL Jackson Hayes from Virginia Beach believed he had seen everything during his military missions. However, his solo survival training expedition in the Alaskan interior would prove that there are things that cannot be mastered with tactics or preparation. At 42 years old, Jackson had credentials that very few civilians could match. 12 years of active service with SEAL Team 6, multiple deployments in hostile environments from Afghanistan to Somalia, and extensive experience in Arctic warfare training. After retiring from the Navy in 2022, he had established himself as a top-tier survival instructor, teaching courses for military contractors, law enforcement agencies, and extreme adventure enthusiasts. Jackson's decision to carry out a solo survival expedition in Alaska was driven by both professional and personal reasons. His training company, Arctic Edge Survival, was expanding its program to include survival in extreme cold conditions, and Jackson needed to personally test techniques and equipment in an environment capable of challenging even the most experienced operators. In addition, he was approaching his 43rd birthday and wanted to prove to himself that civilian life had not softened the edge that military training had sharpened to near perfection. The place Jackson chose was a remote area in the interior of the Alaska Range, approximately 150 miles southwest of Fairbanks, accessible only by bush plane during the brief summer season. The region was known for its harsh conditions, unpredictable weather, and complete isolation from human activity. Jackson's plan was ambitious, even by military standards. 30 days of solo survival using only basic equipment, with the goal of documenting techniques that could be incorporated into advanced training programs. His preparation was meticulous. Jackson spent months researching weather patterns, wildlife behavior, and the region's topographic features. He consulted with Alaskan bush pilots, indigenous hunting guides, and other survival experts to understand the particular challenges of the wild interior. His gear was selected and tested with extreme care: military clothing for intense cold, specialized tools designed for Arctic conditions, and minimal food provisions intended to last only the first few days while he established sustainable routines for gathering and hunting. Jackson's wife, Sarah, also a former military intelligence officer, initially opposed the expedition. She knew the risks of solo operations in hostile environments and believed civilian life should not require such extreme challenges. However, Jackson's arguments about the professional need for the training and his extensive preparation eventually convinced her to support the mission, though she insisted on establishing satellite communication protocols that would allow regular contact with the outside world. On August 10, 2024, bush pilot Charlie Morrison flew Jackson to a remote landing strip, carved into the tundra by mining operations decades earlier. Charlie had spent more than 20 years transporting clients into the Alaskan wilderness and was immediately impressed by Jackson's professional attitude and obviously thorough preparation. The drop-off went smoothly. Jackson set up a temporary camp and performed equipment checks while Charlie refueled for the return flight to Fairbanks. Jackson's first communications followed the planned schedule exactly. His first satellite phone call, made on August 12th, described the successful establishment of a more permanent camp in a defensible position, with access to fresh water and suitable shelter materials. His voice sounded confident and professional, reporting normal wildlife activity and weather conditions within expected parameters. Jackson mentioned observing herds of caribou, several bird species, and signs of brown bear activity, but nothing that would cause concern for someone with his experience. The second scheduled communication, on August 15th, revealed the first signs of unusual events. Jackson reported that his electronic equipment was suffering intermittent failures he could not explain through normal diagnostic procedures. His GPS unit showed coordinate readings that jumped randomly. His compass gave inconsistent magnetic headings, and his satellite phone required several attempts before achieving a connection. Even more concerning was Jackson's description of what he called temperature anomalies, sudden drops in the air that lasted several minutes, even during sunny afternoons. Jackson's military training had taught him to document everything with precision, and his field journal, recovered later, showed increasingly detailed observations about environmental conditions that did not match his extensive experience in cold climates. He recorded cases in which morning frost appeared on vegetation, even though the air temperature was well above freezing, water sources that showed ice formation during the warmest hours of the day, and atmospheric phenomena that seemed to defy basic meteorological principles. By August 18th, Jackson's communications had taken on a distinctly different tone. Although he maintained his characteristic military precision while reporting, he began describing animal behavior that challenged his understanding of wildlife psychology. He observed wolves, bears, and caribou interacting in ways that suggested coordination, not natural predator-prey relationships. Most unsettling was his report that the animals appeared to be deliberately avoiding his camp in patterns that, when marked on his tactical planning sheets, formed geometric figures. Jackson's background included extensive training in psychological operations and counterintelligence techniques, making him highly resistant to paranoia or stress-induced hallucinations. However, his August 22nd communication contained observations that he himself admitted sounded outside normal parameters. He described discovering what appeared to be deliberate arrangements of natural materials, stones, branches, and animal bones placed in complex patterns, suggesting intelligent design, not random natural processes. The most disturbing aspect of Jackson's reports was his description of temperature anomalies that were becoming increasingly frequent and severe. He documented episodes in which his breath became visible in the middle of the afternoon, even though the thermometer read close to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and occasions when water froze completely inside his canteen while he was drinking from it. His military training had exposed him to various exotic weapon systems, which led him to consider whether he might be experiencing some kind of directed energy attack or experimental military technology test. Jackson's emergency beacon activated automatically on August 28th, transmitting a distress signal that indicated equipment failure rather than manual activation. Search and rescue operations began immediately, with the Alaska State Troopers coordinating helicopter searches and ground teams mobilized from Fairbanks and other regional bases. The beacon signal led rescuers to Jackson's last known camp, but what they found there defied all explanation. Jackson's camp showed signs of hurried but organized abandonment. His shelter was intact and properly secured. His equipment had been packed and stored carefully according to military protocols, but Jackson was nowhere to be found. Most baffling was the discovery that his survival equipment had been modified in ways that demonstrated advanced technical knowledge. His GPS unit had been disassembled and rebuilt with additional components that appeared to be improvised measuring devices, and his satellite phone had been connected to a complex network of antennas and sensors made from recovered materials. The centerpiece of Jackson's final camp was a detailed map he had constructed using traditional military cartography techniques. The map showed the surrounding terrain with a precision exceeding available topographic surveys, but it also included features that did not correspond to any known geographic points. Jackson had marked locations with symbols that seemed to represent temperature measurement points, magnetic field anomalies, and what he labeled coordination nodes, where patterns of wildlife behavior intersected. Search teams found Jackson's journal stored in a waterproof container, providing a detailed view of his final weeks in the wilderness. The entries showed systematic documentation of phenomena that challenged scientific understanding, but retained the analytical objectivity of a military intelligence report. Jackson had clearly attempted to approach increasingly strange experiences with the same methodical precision he would apply to any tactical situation. The final journal entries described his decision to conduct what he called active reconnaissance of the anomalous zones he had identified. He planned to move systematically through areas where the temperature and magnetic anomalies were most pronounced, using improvised scientific instruments to collect data that might explain the phenomena he was experiencing. Jackson's last entry, dated August 27th, indicated his intention to investigate a location he had designated as Primary Anomaly Site Alpha, a valley located approximately 5 miles from his base camp, where multiple strange phenomena seemed to converge. Ground teams searched the valley Jackson had identified, but they found only more evidence of his systematic approach to inexplicable circumstances. The area contained numerous improvised measurement stations, carefully constructed arrangements of recovered equipment designed to monitor temperature, magnetic fields, and other environmental factors. The precision and organization of these installations demonstrated Jackson's military engineering skills, but their purpose remained a mystery to civilian investigators. Most disturbing was the discovery of what appeared to be Jackson's final measurement station, located at the center of a natural clearing where the temperature anomalies he had described would have been most severe. The station was more elaborate than the others. It incorporated complex arrangements of reflective materials, electronic components, and geometric patterns that suggested Jackson had developed theories about the phenomena he was investigating. However, the station showed signs of sudden abandonment, with sensitive equipment exposed to the weather and measurement records ending in the middle of a sentence. The search for Jackson Hayes continued for more than 3 weeks, covering hundreds of square miles of some of Alaska's most difficult terrain. Despite extensive aerial reconnaissance, ground teams, and specialized tracking resources, no trace of him was ever found. The region's hostile environment and dangerous wildlife could explain the disappearance of a body, but not the total absence of evidence indicating direction of travel or cause of departure from his established camps. Jackson's case drew the attention of military investigators familiar with his background and capabilities. Former SEAL teammates volunteered for additional searches, pointing out that Jackson's survival skills and tactical training made it extremely unlikely that he had simply gotten lost or succumbed to ordinary wilderness dangers. Some investigators theorized that Jackson may have encountered classified military testing activity, but inquiries to the appropriate agencies received no acknowledgement of any operations in the region. The scientific community showed interest in Jackson's documented observations about temperature and magnetic anomalies, although most experts attributed his measurements to equipment failures or environmental factors unique to the Alaskan interior. However, several researchers pointed out that Jackson's systematic method for documenting unknown phenomena demonstrated valuable scientific methodology, regardless of the final explanation for his experiences. Sarah, Jackson's wife, established a foundation to support search and rescue operations in Alaska, while preserving her husband's research materials for possible future study. She has consistently maintained that Jackson's military training and survival experience make ordinary explanations for his disappearance insufficient, and that his systematic documentation of anomalous phenomena deserves serious scientific consideration. The case has become a subject of interest for researchers of unexplained phenomena in remote wilderness areas, especially those related to electromagnetic anomalies and temperature variations that appear to defy known physical principles. Jackson's military background and methodical approach to documenting what he observed provide a rare case of a trained observer confronting experiences that challenge conventional understanding. Today, the remote region of the Alaska Range where Jackson Hayes disappeared remains largely unexplored, and his case serves as a warning about solo operations in extreme environments. His carefully documented observations of phenomena that seem to exist beyond normal scientific understanding continue to puzzle researchers, while his disappearance remains proof that even the most trained and prepared individuals can encounter mysteries in Alaska that no experience can overcome. The survival expert, who believed his military training had prepared him for any challenge, ultimately discovered that the Alaskan interior holds secrets that cannot be defeated with tactics, training, or superior preparation. In the vast wilderness where he sought to test his limits, Jackson Hayes found something that tested the very boundaries of human understanding. And he left behind only questions, improvised scientific equipment, and the unsettling possibility that some aspects of Alaska's wilderness operate according to principles that remain beyond the reach of even the most skilled and determined explorers. Story 8. At 68 years old, Patricia Williams, a retired teacher from North Carolina, finally had the time and resources necessary to fulfill the dream she had cherished her entire life, seeing the aurora borealis. But her solo trip through Alaska aboard a motorhome would end up becoming her final adventure. Patricia had devoted 43 years to teaching in elementary schools in Charlotte, watching countless students grow while postponing her own dreams until retirement arrived. Her husband, Robert, had died 2 years earlier after a brief battle with cancer, leaving her financially stable but emotionally adrift. The trip to Alaska represented much more than tourism. It was Patricia's declaration that widowhood would not define the years she still had left to live. Her fascination with the aurora borealis began when she was a child, when her grandfather, a former merchant marine, showed her photographs taken during his voyages to northern ports. For decades, Patricia collected books, documentaries, and scientific articles about the phenomenon, eventually turning the spare bedroom in her home into an informal library dedicated to Arctic exploration and indigenous cultures. Her lesson plans often incorporated stories about Alaska's geography and history, inspiring her students with tales of adventure in America's last frontier. Planning the trip took more than a year of meticulous preparation. She purchased a well-maintained Class C motorhome, a 28-foot Winnebago that would serve as both transportation and lodging during her month-long journey. Patricia researched campgrounds, road conditions, and weather patterns with the same thoroughness she had once applied to developing her educational programs. She took recreational vehicle driving courses, learned basic mechanical maintenance, and equipped the motorhome with emergency supplies prepared for Arctic conditions. Her adult children initially opposed the solo trip. Jennifer, her daughter, a nurse in Denver, was concerned about her mother's safety traveling alone through remote regions. David, her son, a lawyer in Raleigh, tried to convince her to join a guided tour instead of undertaking the journey on her own. But Patricia was determined to experience Alaska on her own terms, without the limitations of scheduled itineraries or group dynamics that might prevent her from chasing the auroras wherever and whenever they appeared. Patricia left Charlotte on September 3, 2024, driving the Alaska-Canada Highway through Canada toward Alaska. Her detailed itinerary, shared with her family, included regular communication schedules and emergency contact information for each planned stop. She maintained a travel blog that she updated daily with photographs and descriptions of her progress, sharing her excitement with former colleagues and students who followed her adventure online. The first 3 weeks of the trip exceeded her expectations. She photographed wildlife in the Canadian Rockies, visited historic sites in Dawson City, and finally crossed into Alaska near Tok on September 25th. Her blog entries during that period showed genuine joy and awe at the landscape she was experiencing, mixed with occasional moments of nostalgia for the familiar routines of her former life. Patricia's writing revealed a woman rediscovering her sense of adventure after decades focused on the needs of others. Her planned destination was Fairbanks, where she intended to establish a base for aurora viewing excursions in darker locations outside the city. Patricia's research had identified several remote areas along the Steese Highway where light pollution would not interfere with aurora photography. She had invested in high-quality photography equipment and taken night photography courses specifically to document the northern lights she had dreamed of seeing for so many years. Patricia's last confirmed location was a rest area along the Richardson Highway, approximately 60 miles south of Fairbanks, where she stopped on October 2nd to update her blog and call her daughter. The conversation, according to Jennifer, was typical of their recent communications. Patricia described the stunning fall colors and expressed her excitement about reaching Fairbanks within hours. She mentioned slight fatigue from the long days of driving, but she was eager to begin observing auroras, since the solar activity forecasts predicted excellent visibility conditions. When Patricia did not arrive at her reserved campground in Fairbanks by October 4th, the site manager contacted the Alaska State Troopers. Her family had also grown concerned when the blog updates stopped and phone calls went unanswered. The search began immediately, focusing on the Richardson Highway route between her last known location and Fairbanks. The terrain along this corridor is relatively developed by Alaskan standards, with regular traffic and emergency services, which made a disappearance seem unlikely. State troopers found Patricia's motorhome on October 6th, parked at a scenic overlook approximately 30 miles north of her last confirmed stop. The vehicle was properly positioned in the designated parking area, with no signs of mechanical problems or collision damage. The engine was still running, maintained by the motorhome's automatic systems, and all interior lights were operating normally. Patricia's coffee cup was sitting on the kitchen counter, still containing liquid. Investigations later determined that the coffee had been poured approximately 72 hours earlier. The interior of the motorhome offered disturbing clues about Patricia's final hours. Her personal belongings were arranged as if she had been preparing for bed. Her pajamas were laid out on the bed. Her reading glasses rested on the nightstand beside a book about the indigenous peoples of Alaska. Her photography equipment was set up near the vehicle's large rear window, positioned to photograph auroras, with technical settings that demonstrated her recent mastery of night photography. Most baffling was the discovery that Patricia's security camera system, installed to monitor the area around the motorhome during overnight stops, had recorded her final hours in detail. The footage showed Patricia following her usual nighttime routine until approximately 3:15 a.m. on October 3rd, when she suddenly got out of bed and walked toward the motorhome door. The camera clearly recorded her opening the door and stepping outside, wearing only light pajamas despite temperatures near freezing. The security footage showed Patricia calmly walking away from the motorhome toward the edge of the forest, moving with apparent purpose, not confusion or distress. She did not appear to be responding to any external sound or threat, and her body language suggested deliberate action, not sleepwalking or a medical emergency. Most unsettling was what the infrared cameras captured in the final frames. Patricia stopped at the tree line and appeared to interact with something or someone beyond the camera's range before entering the dense forest and disappearing from view. Digital forensic experts who analyzed the security video found no evidence of other people in the area, mechanical failures in the recording equipment, or any obvious explanation for Patricia's behavior. The timestamp showed that she had remained outside for less than 5 minutes before vanishing into the wilderness, wearing clothing completely unsuitable for surviving temperatures near freezing. Her footprints were clearly visible in the frost-covered ground, leading directly toward the forest with no signs of struggle or force. At first, search teams easily followed Patricia's trail, tracking her bare footprints through the forest for approximately half a mile. The marks showed that she had walked steadily in a straight line, moving around obstacles but maintaining a firm northern direction. However, the trail ended abruptly in a small clearing, where her footprints simply stopped without indicating where she had gone afterward. The clearing showed no signs of disturbance, vehicle tracks, or any explanation for how Patricia could have continued without leaving marks. Extensive searches covered more than 190 square miles of wilderness using helicopters, trained tracking dogs, and thermal imaging equipment. Despite favorable weather conditions and the participation of numerous volunteers familiar with the terrain, no further evidence of Patricia Williams was ever found. The forest in the area was dense but not impassable, and the relatively moderate October weather should have allowed survival for several days, even in inadequate clothing. The investigation into Patricia's history revealed no background of mental illness, sleepwalking, or behavior that could explain her actions. Medical records indicated that she was in excellent health for her age, taking only mild medications for blood pressure and cholesterol, which would not cause confusion or behavioral changes. Her family insisted that Patricia was practical, safety-conscious, and completely rational during her final conversations. The case attracted the attention of researchers specializing in sleepwalking and other parasomnia disorders, but Patricia's age and lack of prior episodes made those explanations unlikely. Sleep specialists noted that complex behaviors such as opening doors and walking long distances rarely occur during sleepwalking episodes, especially in older adults. The deliberate nature of her movements, captured by the security cameras, suggested conscious decision-making rather than unconscious behavior. More unsettling were the reports from other travelers who had spent the night at the same overlook during the weeks before Patricia's disappearance. Several motorhome travelers contacted authorities after the case became public, describing strange dreams and unusual compulsions they had experienced while parked at that location. Some claimed they had dreamed of walking into the forest, while others mentioned feeling inexplicably drawn to explore the area at night. Indigenous elders from nearby communities, consulted by investigators, shared traditional stories about the region that included warnings about places where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds grew thin. These oral traditions describe sites where people could be called to join ancient spirits, particularly during moments of personal transition or loss. Although such explanations were not considered within the official investigation, they offered a cultural context for phenomena that challenged conventional understanding. Patricia's family created a foundation offering rewards for information about her disappearance, but no credible leads ever emerged. Her motorhome was eventually returned to North Carolina, where her children discovered her complete travel journal, documenting every day of the journey up to the final entry. That last note, written the night before her disappearance, expressed deep satisfaction with her adventure and anticipation for the Aurora viewing opportunities in the days ahead. The final passage of the journal read, "I feel more alive than I have felt in years. Alaska has awakened something in me that I thought had died with Robert. Tomorrow begins the part of this journey I have dreamed about since I was a child. Whatever happens, I am grateful for this chance to discover who I am when I am truly alone with the wild beauty of this incredible place." Today, Patricia Williams remains one of Alaska's most baffling missing persons cases. Her story serves as a warning about solo travel in remote regions, although the specific circumstances of her disappearance offer few practical lessons for preventing something similar. The security camera video continues to puzzle investigators, showing a rational woman making what appeared to be a conscious decision to enter a wilderness that would ultimately claim her. The scenic overlook where Patricia's motorhome was found has since been avoided by some travelers, who claim to feel uncomfortable or experience unusual dreams when spending the night there. Park rangers and state troopers occasionally patrol the area, but they have found no additional evidence related to her disappearance and no explanations for the phenomena reported by other visitors. Patricia's case represents the deep mysteries Alaska holds for those who venture too far beyond familiar territory. A woman who had spent her entire career caring for and shaping others finally claimed time for her own dreams, only to disappear while pursuing the northern lights she had longed to see. In the vast wilderness of America's last frontier, Patricia Williams joined the countless souls who have walked into Alaska's embrace and never returned, leaving behind only questions about what calls to certain people from the deep forests and endless skies of North America's most mysterious state. Her retirement adventure, intended to begin a new chapter of independence and discovery, instead became one final mystery that continues to haunt investigators and family members who search for answers that may exist beyond the reach of conventional understanding. In Alaska, where the line between the possible and the impossible blurs like auroras dancing across the midnight sky, Patricia Williams discovered that some dreams carry prices that cannot be calculated until the moment when it is already too late to change direction and return to the safety of the known world.